The Galactic Empire had waited for centuries for the perfect moment to strike Earth. They watched from afar, studying its people and its planet, taking note of every weakness they could exploit. But in their arrogance, they failed to see what was hidden beneath the surface. Earth was a primitive world, in their eyes a place of chaos, with nations constantly in conflict, a planet with no unified force to defend it. But the Empire saw something in the women of Earth, something they believed they could easily control. They saw softness and fragility, a belief that women would be no more than a commodity to be conquered and used. But the Empire had no idea of the fire that burned within them, no comprehension of the strength these women carried deep inside, a strength forged through centuries of oppression and resistance. The invasion came without warning. The Empire's massive warships appeared in the sky like a swarm of locusts, blocking out the sun, each ship carrying thousands of soldiers genetically engineered for combat. Their weapons, far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. The first wave hit major cities worldwide. The people panicked as the alien forces descended upon them. But the Empire's commanders were certain of their victory. They focused on the women of Earth, those they believed would fold under pressure, believing they would submit. Without question, they began targeting women across the globe, forcing them into camps and making them part of their twisted conquest. But what the Empire failed to account for was the strength in unity. When women came together, when they fought not just for survival, but for each other, the soldiers of the Empire were not ready for the resilience of Earth's women. They were not ready for the way women who had never held weapons before picked up guns and knives with a fury that startled even the most battle-hardened of the invaders. What the Empire didn't know was that Earth's women had always been strong. They had always fought battles in silence, battles. No one had ever seen the war against inequality, the fight for rights, the struggle to have a voice. And now they would fight the greatest battle of all, the battle for their world. As the initial shockwave of the invasion hit, a different kind of resistance began to emerge. Women from all corners of the Earth came together in secret, hiding in plain sight, forming underground networks. Their anger turned to strategy, and their strength turned into power. They spread the word to every woman who would listen. We are not alone, we fight together. From the mountains of South America to the streets of Tokyo, from the deserts of Africa to the bustling cities of Europe, women began to mobilize, building weapons, hiding from the invaders, and striking when the Empire least expected it. Their first blows were small but powerful. They sabotaged imperial equipment, broke into supply lines, and freed those who had been captured. With each victory, the resistance grew stronger. The Empire's commanders were not worried at first. They believed it was a small rebellion, and they would crush it in time. But the truth was that the women of Earth were just beginning to awaken to something much greater than they realized, an untapped power within them. That the Empire would never be prepared for. The battle had only just begun, and Earth's women would prove to the universe that they were far from the weak and defenseless beings the Empire thought them to be. The first wave of resistance was small, but it spread quickly across the world like wildfire as Earth's women began to rise up in ways the invaders could not understand. Small groups formed in hidden corners of cities and remote villages. They trained in secret and learned quickly how to use the weapons of their enemy against them. They discovered the weaknesses of the Empire's technology and found ways to sabotage it in subtle but effective ways. Every victory, no matter how small, gave them confidence and reinforced the truth that they were not helpless, that they had power and strength within them that the Empire could never have anticipated. The Empire's commanders continued to underestimate the resistance, dismissing it as a minor inconvenience, at best a series of small skirmishes that would fizzle out with time. But they could not ignore the growing number of reports coming in from all corners of Earth. More women were fighting, more women were organizing, more women were joining the resistance. With each passing day, the Empire found itself losing ground. They tried to crush the resistance with overwhelming force. But every time they did, they only seemed to inspire more women to join the fight, to take up arms and protect their world. In secret bunkers underground and hidden in plain sight, women began to share knowledge, to strategize, to pass down wisdom from one generation to the next. They were not just fighting to survive, they were fighting to reclaim what had always been theirs, their right to exist in a world where they were free from oppression, free to be themselves without fear. And without the shadow of the Empire looming over them, they were no longer just fighting for Earth. They were fighting for every woman who had ever been silenced, every woman who had ever been held back from her potential. The resistance began to grow stronger, not just because of their knowledge or their power, but because of the unity that formed among them. Women from every background, every culture, every race, every walk of life came together under one banner. The power of their shared purpose was undeniable. They were no longer divided by differences or boundaries. They were united by a common cause, by a fire that burned deep within them, the desire to protect their homes, their families, and their future. As the women of Earth gained ground, the Empire's forces began to panic. Their once assured dominance now slipping through their fingers. They realized too late that Earth was not the easy target. They had assumed it to be. The Empire had thought they could crush the resistance with their technology and their numbers, but they had failed to account for the sheer will of Earth's women, the fire in their hearts that would not be extinguished. The women of Earth were becoming something more than they had ever been before. They were becoming a force unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. And as the Empire scrambled to regroup, they were unaware of the true power that was awakening within the women of Earth, a power that would soon change the course of the entire war and leave the Empire with no chance of victory. The resistance was no longer just a series of scattered rebellions. It had become a force to be reckoned with. The women of Earth were not only fighting back, they were becoming organized and strategic. They shared information across borders, learning from each other, adapting their tactics to counter the Empire's every move. In secret chambers and hidden safe houses, they developed new technologies from the remnants of the Empire's advanced weaponry. They harnessed their collective knowledge to turn the tide of battle against the invaders. The more the Empire attacked, the more Earth's women rose up. In every city, in every village, there were whispers of the resistance, its influence spreading like a storm across the planet. Women from every corner of the Earth began to join the fight, no longer isolated or disconnected. They found strength in each other and in the knowledge that they were not alone. The leaders of the resistance emerged from every nation and every background. They were not just military leaders, but scientists, doctors, engineers, and survivors who understood that this battle was not just for their own survival, but for the survival of humanity itself. As the resistance expanded, it became clear that the Empire had made a fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated the power of unity, the power of women who had lived their lives fighting battles invisible to the rest of the world, battles that had prepared them for this very moment. The fight was no longer just a fight against an alien invasion. It was a fight to reclaim their world, a fight to prove that no one could hold them down any longer. The women who had once been dismissed and overlooked now stood at the forefront of the resistance, leading the charge with strength and determination. It wasn't long before the Empire realized that their initial strategy had failed. The more they sent their forces to Earth, the more the resistance grew stronger. With every failed mission, more women were inspired to join the cause. They saw the courage of those who fought, and it sparked something deep within them, something primal that demanded action. No longer were they willing to wait for someone else to fight for them. They knew the time had come to stand and fight for their world, their families, and their future. The first major victory came when a group of women from various countries infiltrated an Imperial supply ship and commandeered it with remarkable efficiency. They didn't just steal the supplies, they sabotaged the ship's systems and sent it crashing into an Imperial base. The explosion sent shockwaves through the Empire's ranks. It was the first real blow to their plans, and it reverberated across the galaxy. It proved that Earth's women were not only capable of resistance, they could strike at the heart of the Empire itself. But this was just the beginning. The victory fueled the fire of the resistance, and the women who had once been mere survivors now became the leaders of a movement. They were no longer fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future of their world. The Empire's soldiers had no idea what was coming. They thought they had seen the best of Earth's resistance, but they were wrong. The true power of Earth's women had only just begun to reveal itself. The Empire's commanders sat in their high-tech war rooms, oblivious to the growing threat Earth's women posed. They believed the resistance was just a temporary disruption, a few desperate survivors clinging to a fleeting hope, soon to be crushed under the weight of their superior forces. Their arrogance clouded their judgment as they continued to send wave after wave of their elite soldiers to crush the rebellion. They underestimated the women of Earth, believing they would falter, but the resistance was only growing stronger with each attempt to silence it. The first major mistake the Empire made was not recognizing the shift in Earth's tactics. The women no longer fought sporadically. They had learned to adapt and innovate. Their guerrilla warfare became more sophisticated, their strikes more precise. They began targeting supply chains, communication hubs, and vulnerable Imperial strongholds. No longer content with small skirmishes, they were striking at the heart of the Empire's infrastructure with calculated precision. Each mission, carried out by the women of Earth, was a blow to the Empire's confidence, and a step closer to their downfall. The Empire's soldiers began to report increasing difficulty in containing the rebellion. No matter how hard they pushed back, the resistance continued to grow. The turning point came when a joint operation, led by women from all corners of the world, succeeded in capturing an Imperial command ship. The women managed to infiltrate the heavily guarded vessel under the cover of night and disable its security systems before launching a full-scale assault. The operation was a success, but the real victory came when they extracted critical intelligence from the ship's databases. They uncovered the Empire's plans for Earth's ultimate subjugation, their brutal strategy to enslave the population and strip the planet of its resources. The resistance now had the knowledge to not only survive, but to fight back with purpose. They now had a clear understanding of the Empire's weaknesses and vulnerabilities. As this new information spread through the ranks of Earth's women, the resistance began to change. It was no longer a ragtag collection of fighters, but a well-coordinated military force, a force united by a singular purpose to expel the Empire from their world and protect everything they had fought for. The Empire's command chain was now aware of the growing threat, but they still refused to take it seriously. They believed that with enough firepower and overwhelming numbers, they could crush Earth's resistance once and for all, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten about the power of unity. In every corner of Earth, women continued to rise up. They sabotaged weapons factories, infiltrated Imperial communications networks, and launched strategic attacks on Imperial strongholds. They were relentless and efficient with each mission. They completed. Their strength grew. The fear within the Empire's forces intensified. Reports came in of entire battalions being overrun by small groups of women, working together with skill and determination that shocked even the Empire's best-trained soldiers. They no longer saw themselves as fighting just for survival. They fought for their families, their homes, their future, and most importantly, they fought to reclaim their world. The Empire's commanders began to realize too late that their initial strategy had been flawed. They had thought Earth's women would be an easy conquest, but instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous, a force that would not be so easily defeated. And as the resistance continued to gain ground, the Empire knew they had only one option left: launch a final full-scale assault on Earth in an attempt to crush the rebellion before it became an unstoppable force. But they were too late. The women of Earth had already begun to harness something far greater than technology, something ancient and powerful that the Empire had no way of understanding or controlling. As Earth's resistance surged forward, the women who had once fought solely for survival began to realize they were no longer just fighting for their planet. They were fighting for something much greater than themselves. They were tapping into a power that had been dormant for millennia. An ancient energy woven into the fabric of their very being, a connection to something cosmic that had long been buried beneath the surface of Earth. But now it was awakening with every battle, every victory. They felt it grow stronger. The more they fought, the more they unlocked this hidden potential that had always been a part of them. It started with small bursts of power. At first, women began to display remarkable abilities. They could move faster than humanly possible. Their reflexes sharpened. They could lift objects that would have once been too heavy. Their senses became heightened in ways they couldn't explain. The resistance began to realize that these powers were not a mere coincidence. They weren't just the result of desperation or adrenaline. There was something deeper, something tied to the very essence of what it meant to be a woman on Earth. The women who had once been seen as fragile and weak were now becoming something more than human. They were tapping into an energy that flowed through them and connected them to the planet itself. It was as if Earth itself was awakening. Along with them, ancient forces that had long been forgotten were stirring in response to the women's call. Their newfound powers were a manifestation of this connection. They could control the elements, manipulate energy, and even communicate telepathically with each other. Their powers were not just physical but spiritual, a deep well of strength and wisdom that they had only begun to understand. With this new power at their disposal, the resistance began to take on a new form. They weren't just fighting the Empire, now they were fighting the very forces that had kept them oppressed for centuries. They were fighting to reclaim their birthright, their right to exist freely and powerfully on their own terms. Their bond with the Earth was their greatest weapon, and the Empire had no idea how to counter it. The first signs of this power were small, subtle changes during battles. At first, they appeared as flashes of light or bursts of energy that left the invaders scrambling to understand what was happening. But as the women began to train and harness this new power, they quickly realized they could do far more than they had ever imagined. They could disrupt imperial technology. With a thought, they could manipulate the very terrain they fought on. They could summon storms and bend the elements to their will, and most importantly, they could communicate with each other across vast distances, sharing thoughts and strategies in real time. The Empire's forces began to report strange phenomena on Earth, unusual energy readings and disturbances in their equipment. They thought it was just an anomaly, but it became clear that the women of Earth had tapped into something much more powerful than anything they had seen before. The Empire's best scientists and engineers were baffled. They could not replicate the women's abilities. No matter how hard they tried, they were dealing with forces beyond their understanding, forces that had been unleashed by the women's unity and strength. As the resistance grew stronger and more powerful, the Empire's desperation grew. They had no idea what they were truly up against. They had underestimated the will and power of Earth's women, and now they were facing an enemy unlike anything they had ever encountered. The women of Earth had become a force of nature, and the Empire was beginning to realize too late that they had made a grave mistake in thinking Earth's women were anything less than unstoppable. The Empire was reeling from the realization that Earth's women were no longer the easy target they had once believed them to be. Their once unwavering confidence began to crumble as reports came in of Imperial forces being overwhelmed by women who could no longer be classified as mere soldiers or rebels. They were becoming something far more dangerous, something that defied all logic and explanation. The alien invaders, who had once seen themselves as the superior force in the galaxy, now found themselves outmatched by an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The first encounter with the new power was enough to send shockwaves through the Empire's command structure. A battalion of elite soldiers sent to crush a small resistance group in the mountains found themselves facing an enemy they could not comprehend. Women who seemed to control the very elements themselves. Lightning crackled in the air with every strike. They made the ground trembled beneath their feet. The sky darkened as storms erupted in the wake of their presence. The Empire's soldiers tried to retaliate, but their weapons malfunctioned and their armor failed to protect them. As the women fought with a ferocity that was almost supernatural, they were no longer just fighting with physical strength, they were fighting with the energy of the planet itself. The Empire's scientific teams were called in to investigate the strange occurrences, but they were met with failure. No matter how hard they tried, they could not replicate the phenomenon. They couldn't understand what was happening, or why Earth's women had suddenly developed these incredible abilities. There was no technological explanation, no scientific theory that could account for it. The Empire's arrogance had blinded them to the truth. They had underestimated Earth's women, and in doing so they had awakened a power that could not be controlled. As the resistance continued to grow in strength and numbers, the women's powers became more refined, more precise. They learned to control their abilities, to use them strategically. They could now communicate telepathically across great distances, allowing them to coordinate their attacks with flawless precision. Their attacks were no longer isolated raids, they were full-scale campaigns that struck at the heart of the Empire's forces. Their newfound powers gave them the edge they needed to turn the tide of war. The Empire's commanders, desperate to regain control, sent their most fearsome generals to Earth, hoping to squash the rebellion once and for all. But even their most elite soldiers were no match for the resistance. They had no understanding of the forces. They were up against no defense against the power the women now wielded. Battles that once seemed unwinnable were now being fought on Earth's terms. The Empire's vast fleets were no match for the resistance's newfound strength. The alien invaders, once confident in their superiority, now found themselves facing an enemy that could not be defeated by conventional means. In their desperation, the Empire tried everything they could think of to break the resistance. They sent wave after wave of soldiers to Earth. They launched orbital bombardments and attempted to disrupt the planet's weather patterns. They even tried to isolate Earth from the rest of the galaxy. But it was no use. The women of Earth had already unlocked something far greater than technology or firepower. They had unlocked the power of unity and the force of their will, and no matter what the Empire did, they could not break it. The Empire's forces began to fracture as their best troops fell to the relentless onslaught of Earth's women. They realized too late that the true strength of the resistance did not lie in weapons or tactics, but in the unwavering bond that had formed between the women of Earth, a bond forged in the fires of oppression and war. And it was that bond that would be their undoing, because as long as the women stood together, no force in the galaxy could defeat them. The Empire had no more options left. They had thrown everything they had at Earth, and yet the resistance only grew stronger and more organized. Their forces began to falter as Earth's women proved time and again that they could not be crushed, not by firepower, not by numbers, and certainly not by fear. The women had become something the Empire had never anticipated, a force of nature that was as relentless as it was powerful. The Empire's most seasoned generals were sent to Earth to eliminate the resistance once and for all, but even they began to realize the truth too late. They were facing an enemy that could not be defeated through conventional methods or brute strength. General Zorath was the Empire's most feared tactician. Known for his ruthlessness and cunning, he had conquered entire star systems with ease. His reputation was built on a string of victories that made him a legend within the Empire. But even Zorath could not understand the true nature of the force he was up against. He arrived on Earth with a fleet of ships at his command, confident that he could crush the resistance. With the might of the Empire behind him, he expected to find disorganized fighters who would break under pressure. But instead, he found something else, something far more dangerous. The first battle was a brutal clash that took place in the heart of what was once New York City. Zorath's forces descended upon the city expecting an easy victory, but as the battle raged on, it became clear that they were not fighting against mere rebels. They were fighting against women who had become something more, something beyond human. Their powers seemed to multiply with every strike, every move they made. The ground shook with the force of their blows. Lightning crackled in the air, and the sky turned dark as storms swirled above them. Zorath's soldiers were not prepared for what they were facing. Their weapons malfunctioned, their tactics failed, and their morale began to crumble under the weight of an enemy they could not comprehend. Zorath watched in disbelief as his elite troops were pushed back by small groups of women working together with uncanny precision and coordination. They didn't just fight with weapons, they fought with energy, with the power of the Earth itself. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered, and with each victory he could see the resistance growing stronger, their unity fueling their strength, and their powers expanding in ways that defied logic. Despite his legendary reputation, Zorath found himself at a loss. He could not defeat this enemy, not through firepower, not through tactics, and certainly not through fear. The resistance was unshakable, they were relentless. And as the battle continued, he realized that his own forces were beginning to crumble under the pressure. The women of Earth were not just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win, to reclaim their world, and to protect their future. And Zorath's understanding of war strategy and power had no answer to that kind of will. In his desperation, Zorath tried everything in his power to break the resistance. He ordered orbital bombardments in an attempt to level the city, But even that failed as the women used their powers to shield themselves and their people. They manipulated the very atmosphere itself to deflect the blasts and redirect the energy back toward the Empire's ships. Their abilities were growing exponentially, and with each attack, they seemed to be pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Zorath's final gamble was to confront the leaders of the resistance. Directly, he ordered a full assault on their hidden headquarters deep within the mountains of South America, hoping to crush the heart of the movement. But by the time his forces arrived, the women were already prepared. They had known he would come, and they were ready to face him head on. What he didn't realize was that Earth's women had already become something far beyond anything the Empire could understand. And no matter how hard Zorath tried, he could not destroy the will and power of those who fought for their world. The final confrontation was inevitable, and when it came, it was unlike anything the Empire had ever experienced. General Zorath's forces descended upon the hidden stronghold with the fury of 1,000 storms. They had come to eradicate the resistance once, and for all they believed that if they could destroy the leaders of the women's movement, the rest of the rebellion would collapse. But what Zorath did not understand was that the resistance had already grown beyond the confines of any single leader. It was no longer about individuals. It was about the unity and power of every woman who had ever stood up to fight for their world. As Zorath's forces stormed the base, the women stood together with a calm determination. They had no fear, no hesitation. They knew what they were fighting for. They had seen the horrors of the Empire's invasion, and they had felt the pulse of the earth beneath their feet guiding them. It was in the way the wind howled through the trees, the way the ground trembled with each step they took. It was in the storms that had become their ally. The resistance had long since realized that their power was not simply their strength alone. It was the bond they shared with the planet and with each other, and it was this bond that the Empire could never understand or conquer. As the battle raged on, Zorath's forces found themselves caught in a whirlwind of resistance. They fought against women who seemed to control the very elements themselves. Bolts of lightning crackled from their fingertips. The sky itself seemed to bend and twist under their power. The ground shifted and cracked as if the earth itself was fighting back with them. Zorath's soldiers were caught off guard. Their weapons malfunctioned, their armor shattered under the force of the women's attacks. And no matter how hard they fought, they could not break through the tide of unity and strength that washed over them. Zorath watched in disbelief as his best soldiers fell before the resistance with no explanation for how or why it was happening. They had all underestimated the true power of Earth's women. They had all believed that they could crush them with brute force. But what they didn't realize was that the strength of the women came from something far deeper than technology or weapons. It came from the very soul of their planet and their collective will to protect it. The battle turned into a war of attrition as Zorath realized that his forces could not hold their ground against the relentless onslaught. The more his soldiers fell, the more the resistance seemed to grow in strength. It was as if each loss fueled the women's power. Even more, their unity became their weapon. Their shared strength became a force that no weapon could touch. Zorath's elite troops were now scattered and broken, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the entire Empire's presence on Earth would be wiped away. In a final act of desperation, Zorath attempted to retreat. He ordered his remaining forces to fall back and regroup. But by then it was too late. The women had already surrounded them. They had cut off every escape route, and in the distance Zorath could see the massive fleets of Imperial ships in orbit around the planet. They were no longer a threat. The women of Earth had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of war, and now the Empire's forces were cornered with no way out. As the last of Zorath's forces surrendered, the women of Earth stood victorious. Their power had grown beyond the boundaries of what even they could comprehend. They had unlocked something within themselves that had always been waiting to be discovered, and in doing so they had shattered the Empire's grip on their world. They had proven that no force in the galaxy could ever conquer them, no matter how advanced or powerful. They were the women of Earth, had reclaimed their planet, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Empire's defeat was not just a victory for Earth. It was a message to the galaxy that no one could ever underestimate the power of those who fight for their freedom. The defeat of the Empire was not the end, but a new beginning for Earth and its people. The victory was not only a physical one, but a spiritual and emotional awakening that resonated throughout the planet. Earth's women had not only reclaimed their world, they had reshaped the very fabric of existence itself. Their powers grew beyond even what they had imagined before they had unlocked the full potential of their connection to the planet. The energy that flowed through their veins now pulsed in harmony with the Earth itself, and the Earth responded in kind. Mountains rose and rivers shifted, as if the planet was reaffirming its bond with the women who had protected it for so long. With the Empire in retreat and the galaxy watching, the women of Earth took their place as the true leaders of their world. They knew their work was far from over. The resistance had shown them that Earth's power lay not just in its ability to defend itself, but in the unity of its people. Earth had been divided for so long, fractured by borders, wars, and ideologies. But now the women had proven that when they stood together, there was nothing they could not overcome. And as they looked to the future, they knew that their fight was not just for Earth, but for every world across the galaxy that had been subjugated by forces like the Empire. The women of Earth now turned their attention to the stars. With their newfound power and understanding, they began to rebuild what had been broken and to create a new order based on unity and cooperation. No longer would they allow the galaxy to be dominated by greed and tyranny. They sent emissaries to other planets to share the knowledge they had gained, to offer help and guidance to those who had been oppressed. The message was clear: no one would ever again be allowed to hold power over others through fear and violence. And if anyone dared to challenge the will of Earth's women, they would face a force far more powerful than any army they had ever known. The Empire's fall sent ripples through the galaxy. Many alien species who had long been oppressed by the Empire saw the defeat of their oppressors as a beacon of hope. They began to rise up in their own ways and challenge the old order. But they were not alone. They knew that the women of Earth stood ready to help them reclaim their freedom. Earth's women had become a symbol of resistance, a symbol of strength and unity that spread beyond the confines of their own planet. The galaxy was no longer a place where the strong could prey on the weak. It was a place where every voice had the power to be heard, and no one would ever again be silenced. As Earth entered this new era, the women took on roles of leadership and governance. They rebuilt cities and communities. They created new systems of justice that were fair and compassionate. They formed alliances with other civilizations and created a network of peacekeepers who would ensure that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. Earth had become a beacon of light in a dark galaxy, and the women who had fought so fiercely to protect it stood at the helm, guiding it toward a future of hope and prosperity. But even as Earth flourished and peace spread across the stars, there was always a reminder of the cost of their victory, the sacrifices that had been made along the way. Every woman who had fallen in battle, every life lost in the fight for freedom, was etched into their hearts and minds. The women of Earth knew that their fight had been about more than just their planet. It had been about something universal, about the power of unity and love, and the belief that no one should ever be forced to live in fear. And as they looked to the future, they knew that their journey was far from over, because as long as there were others in the galaxy who suffered, they would always rise up to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. They would always stand as guardians of peace and freedom across the stars.